The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the host and co-chair of the webinar. My name is Sidita Hase, and we represent the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality. We host monthly webinars, as many of you know by now, and we continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in my ASQ HD&L community site. Before we introduce our guest speaker, let me go over some ground rules. If there is any questions or comments that you might have during this webinar, please use the question tab. So there is not a chat tab for you to use, but the question tab. This webinar will be held for about 45 minutes presentation with a 15 minutes at the end for question and answers. But if you have questions coming up during the webinar, as I said, just use the question box and we'll take those. For those who attend minimum 40 minutes, you need to attend minimum 40 minutes of the presentation, not just the question and answers. You will receive a 0.1 CU through an email, which I'll be sending within 24 hours. You can claim that, save that as a PDF, and claim that for ASQ credit. We're very delighted to introduce you to our tonight's speaker, and we are very, very happy to have here to discuss in this very particular times a burnout situation. This is a common issue, even if we weren't going through these times, but particularly in these times, I think it's very important. We're very happy to have here Ilona Salmons. She's a Los Angeles-based psychotherapist and leadership consultant. She works here in her area with high-achieving professionals to address and resolve personal and occupational issues, including chronic stress and burnout as well, which we'll be discussing tonight as well. So thank you, Ilona, for that. As a former HR manager, Ilona intimately understands the role of personal and environmental factors which play in contributing to a high performance work culture, play an important role in that one. She's very passionate about creating workplaces where team members can thrive for the benefits of themselves, but also of the organizations as well. Ilona is pretty highly educated. She holds a psychology degree, a bachelor's psychology degree, a master's in clinical psychology, as well as a doctorate in organizational leadership, where she also had focused her research on wellness in highly demanding workplaces and published as well her dissertation and best practices for managing burnout in attorneys. She's a marriage and family therapist as well, licensed by the California Board of Behavioral Sciences, and has a private practice in Los Angeles. As she's also a state qualified professor and with the Los Angeles Community College. So we have all sort of areas to cover the topic tonight. So thank you, Ilona, for being here. And it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Sidita, and thank you all for being here as well, for taking time out of the middle of your day to join this presentation. I often joke that the irony of my burnout presentations is that the people who probably need to be here the most didn't have the time to take out of their day to be here. So please just make sure that you're taking really good notes and sharing with your colleagues that you feel might be stressed out during this time. So Sidita gave you a brief background of my history. I first became interested in burnout about 10 years ago. This is well before it was a hot button issue, and I'm excited to see that finally a lot of organizations are coming around and focusing on this very important topic. But at the time, I was working full-time in the corporate world. I was pursuing my master's degree. So this is when I was still a little baby therapist pursuing my degree in clinical psychology. And I was also taking evening classes and working over the weekends to get my client hours, which is a requirement for all therapists for graduation. And almost every hour of every single day, Monday through Sunday, was accounted for. And I was absolutely exhausted. Now, I didn't know too much about burnout at the time, so I didn't know what I was experiencing. But mentally and physically, I was very much exhausted. One of my first internships was at a community mental health clinic. And now I'm so grateful to have my own practice and to have my own office. But I often recount the story that when I worked as a therapist, I worked at a community mental health clinic, and in that type of a setting, you are just assigned to an office. And most of my clients I saw in this very small office where there was essentially a desk and two chairs. And I was so tired that in between clients, even if I had 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I would put those two little chairs together and I would take a quick little nap just to recharge. And it was not a sustainable way to live for an extended period of time. So I was grateful that that only lasted for about a year and a half. And then when I moved into my HR role and I started to work more with therapy clients, I saw that a lot of other people were also struggling to balance their professional aspirations and their personal well-being. So that's when I started to really dive into the research. I looked at books and articles that talked about this topic, and I learned a lot about burnout. And what's interesting about burnout is that although it is a perfect storm of really individual organizational factors and institutional factors, so different industries experience burnout to different extents, what I learned based on the research is that the environment is the #1 contributor to burnout. So even if you're the most zen, calm, relaxed person in the world, if the work environment is toxic enough, you will be at a minimum at risk of experiencing some of the symptoms of burnout. So when I learned this, that's when I decided to go back to school and pursue my doctorate in organizational leadership. I recognized at the time that I didn't have the skills that I needed to help people feel better at an organizational level. So I didn't just want to sit around and wait for people to come and come into my office after they got burned out. I wanted to be at the forefront. I wanted to help people before they got burned out to prevent burnout. So part of my practice now is working with organizations to help prevent burnout and help companies create a culture that is aligned with the research in psychology of how people thrive. So human beings need pretty simple, though very specific things to thrive in a work environment. And the work that I do helps organizations create that in their companies. So coupled with my training and my work as a therapist, I really move away from the disease model that mental health is sometimes unfortunately known for. And I really like to look at the individual, and I like to look at the environment, because the well-being of the individual says a lot about the well-being and the context of the environment that they're in. So that's a little bit more about me. And I wanted to start with a quick poll about all of you to learn about you and see how you're doing. I imagine for some of you, perhaps this topic felt relevant, especially with everything that's going on in the world. So
Ilona,
moving on to the next slide. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would just want to make sure. Are you moving the slides so I can launch the poll?
There we go.
Okay. Let's see how
So
everyone
what I'd
is
like you to
feeling
do
right
is
now.
think about an average year at work. I know that some of my clients that I work with, they have busy seasons. Maybe if you're an accountant, for instance, there's a busy time of year, and then the other years, the rest of the year is a little bit slower. So think about, on average, over a course of a year at your work, how exhausted do you feel from your work? Do you never feel exhausted? Do you feel exhausted once a month or less? Do you feel exhausted 2 to 3 times per month, 2 to 3 times per week, or more or less every day? So please take a moment to take the poll.
Yeah, we have a pretty fast crowd here. We have almost 150 people. So let's see how general they're feeling. Okay, so we have more than almost 70% voting. If you want to make a choice, please do now. Okay, let's see. I'll close the poll. So Ilona, we have, I know you don't see these, 46%, 2 to 3 times per month. So almost once a week. 28%, 2 to 3 times per week. Then following 14% once a month or less, 10% every day, and 3% never. So they're never going to teach us something, hopefully. So please share your comments as well.
They should be doing this presentation to never people. So you said the never people were how many? 3%?
3%, correct.
3%. So 13% of people, just based on this poll, feel exhausted from their work once a month or less. The rest of us, we're struggling in some capacity, right? And again, it depends in the industry that you're working. It might be seasonal, it might be throughout the year, but feeling exhausted from work 2 to 3 times per week or almost every day, it really is a difficult way to exist, right? Because often people talk about work-life balance, and in that conversation and work-life balance, it sounds like work and life are pitted against each other. But the reality is that for most of us, we don't die when we go to work, right? And so you have to think of work and life as something that happens simultaneously. And most of us, we spend a lot of our time, a lot of our waking hours, either at work or doing work. And so the goal is to try to create more of a balance and more of a healthy environment. So what I'd like to do first is talk about what the official definition of burnout is, so that we're all on the same page for the rest of this presentation. Burnout is one of those terms that people use in their day-to-day language. I've certainly said it in the wrong context. I've heard other people say it. We often say, I feel burnt out, or this thing is burning me out. But the World Health Organization has a very specific definition for what it means. Perhaps some of you remember last year, there were a lot of new headlines about burnout, things like burnout is officially recognized by the World Health Organization. But burnout has been recognized by the World Health Organization since the 1990s. So nothing new has changed with the new edition of the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-11. Nothing has changed. They just changed the definition a little bit. They added a little bit more detail, but burnout has been recognized for quite some time. So this is not a new phenomenon. There are also a lot of headlines. I remember seeing one at Forbes that said burnout is officially a diagnosable condition. So burnout is not technically a medical condition. It is what is called a syndrome. And a syndrome by definition is just a collection of symptoms. So it's not a diagnosable condition that a mental health clinician, for instance, could diagnose you with, but it's categorized as an occupational phenomenon. So now that we're doing more and more research on burnout and what it means and what it looks like, I do trust that in the next edition of the ICD-11 and in the next edition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that mental health professionals use, I believe that it will be recognized once that research is there to support it. So this is the official definition by the World Health Organization. So burnout is a syndrome that's conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by three distinct dimensions. And so all of these three dimensions are important. The first being the feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. The second, an increase in mental distance from one's job or feeling negative or cynical related to one's job. And then the third is having a reduced professional efficacy. So burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context, and it should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. If you're a student, that's considered an occupation, and it can certainly be applied there. But aside from that, it really is a phenomenon that's been researched in the occupational context. So again, just keep in mind that it's a collection of symptoms within these three dimensions. The way to conceptualize these dimensions is that exhaustion is the dimension that faces inward. So it's your personal, physical, and emotional exhaustion. Cynicism is the dimension that faces outward. It faces toward other people, and specifically, it impacts clients in a negative way. So clients who I have who work in the medical industry, who work in the mental health industry, who work in academia, and who work in the legal industry, they are individuals whose well-being directly impacts their clients. So when I have attorneys who are burned out, for instance, and they fall way behind in their work, they can miss important deadlines that can have serious implications for their clients. Same thing with medical professionals, and I know with everything that's going on in the world right now, a lot of medical professionals are really struggling to take care of themselves because of this huge demand and the additional stress of this worldwide pandemic. So keeping in mind that these three dimensions interact, and then inefficacy is the one that specifically relates to your work product. So it's either a feeling that your work product is being diminished, or perhaps you're getting feedback from your team, your colleagues, your senior leaders that are saying that your work product is being diminished. So these three dimensions are required to meet the criteria for burnout. I do want to take a moment to talk about stress, because I think stress has a really bad reputation, but stress is not bad in and of itself. So not all stress is bad stress. In fact, acute stress, which is temporary short-term stress, it's a very healthy response in our body. It's how our body warns us and protects us from danger, or even helps us perform better on an important task. So if you're feeling a little bit stressed before an important task, just remind yourself that this is good and it'll help me focus my mind, it'll help me remember better. The problem is that while our body is equipped to handle short-term stress, prolonged stress, or what we know as chronic stress, it can take a physical toll and an emotional toll on our well-being. And over a long period of time, it can lead to burnout. So part of this presentation is to help all of you understand that stress in and of itself is not bad, but chronic stress is bad. So at the start of the 20th century, the leading causes of death in the US were infectious diseases, things like pneumonia, things like tuberculosis. Since then, death rates from these diseases have decreased because of antibiotics and other medical technologies, but today the leading cause of death are heart disease, cancer, strokes, and many of these diseases have been attributed to the increased amount of stress that people are feeling in the United States, as well as the behavioral choices that people make to cope with that stress. Things like increase in substance use, increase in even things like energy drinks and not taking care of their health and eating fast food and so on to help manage the stress. So again, while our body is equipped to handle the short-term stress, prolonged or chronic stress, it can take a toll on our physical well-being. And so it's important to keep in mind that if you're feeling stressed for several days in a row, to engage in some type of an intervention. I want to take a moment to talk about the symptoms and the warning signs, because it is important to understand what it looks like physically. And then we're going to do another quick poll. And of course, I will conclude this presentation today. We're going to talk about some tips on how to identify burnout, how to prevent burnout, and if you see that burnout is happening, how to rehabilitate or take care of yourself. But it is important to understand what the early warning signs are, because what you'll see is that a lot of the symptoms and early warning signs are very similar to other potential physical or mental health issues. And so if your mental health professional isn't aware of burnout and the associated symptoms, often my clients come to me because they've been misdiagnosed with something like major depressive disorder. But major depressive disorder doesn't stop on the weekends, right? And so one big hint is that if your mood is really bad throughout the week, but then on Saturdays and Sundays, suddenly you have energy and you feel really good, chances are it's probably not necessarily a major depressive disorder. It could be something work-related. And so there are three specific categories of symptoms. The first is psychological or emotional. So you might notice that you're feeling very anxious throughout the week. You have a lot of worry in different areas of life, but specifically pertaining to work. You might be experiencing panic attacks or overall feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. You might be having mood swings. Either you kind of have high highs, lows, or just feeling pretty low throughout the week, below what your average mood is. You might be feeling overwhelmed, irritable, or on edge, and you might be feeling resentful toward your colleagues or toward your company. Physically, you might be feeling fatigued, and this is independent of how much sleep you get. So let's say you're still getting enough sleep, but you're always just kind of feeling low energy throughout the week. You might be experiencing chest pains or heart palpitations or racing heartbeats. Headaches, especially tension headaches and migraines, can be attributed to this as well as GI issues. So your GI tract is your intestinal tract, everything from when you ingest food to the whole process. And so what happens is that when we are stressed out, our body sends all the resources to our extremities, right, so that we can get big and strong and fight off this threat, even if the threat is a psychological threat. Right? So we get into that fight or flight response. And when all of our resources go to our extremities so that we can be big and strong, they go away from the center of our body, from our core, which is where all of those rest and digest processes happen. And so if you're chronically stressed for an extended period of time, you might be having a lot of stomach issues, for instance, because your body is just not putting enough resources to properly digest your food. Additional physiological symptoms could be things like having body aches, because when we are stressed out, we get really tense. And so you might feel a lot of tension in your shoulders or in your back, and then high blood pressure as well. A quick note on physical symptoms is that it's always a good idea. The first step is to see a medical professional to make sure that there isn't some underlying health issue, to get that taken care of and under control. But if you go to a medical professional, they do all the tests and they say physically everything's fine, your blood work is fine, we did all the tests, everything looks good. Chances are a lot of these physical symptoms are being attributed as a result of a psychological cause. And then finally, behavioral warning signs are things that could change in appetite, either an increase in appetite or, let's say, a decrease in appetite. Sometimes my clients tell me that they're just working all day long and they don't even notice that they didn't eat. They don't have an appetite throughout the day, and it's not until the evening when they finally log off of their email that they remember that they didn't have breakfast or lunch or dinner that entire day. Another big warning sign is an increase in substance use. So I know in the US culture, at least, it's pretty common for people to want to wind down with a glass of wine or something like that after a long day of work. I always discourage my clients from winding down with a glass of wine. I encourage them that if they want to enjoy a glass of wine, they should wind down first, and then they can enjoy the glass of wine. And the difference between that is that you're not teaching yourself to turn to some kind of a substance to help you cope with the anxiety or the stress that you're feeling. You take the time that you need to cope with the anxiety and that stress, and then Again, if you're a wine drinker and you enjoy wine, then you enjoy a nice glass of wine. But you don't want to connect those two things and, again, depend on the substance to help you feel relaxed, because one glass of wine turns into two, and next thing you know, it's a bottle of wine and whatnot. And so it's a very slippery slope. Another behavioral symptom is having mood changes. And so you might notice it, or sometimes your family or friends or colleagues might point it out to you. Again, if you feel like you're overreacting for something that was rather quite small. And then as well as poor concentration or forgetfulness, you're forgetting things all the time, you're missing deadlines, or you're losing interest in things that used to be enjoyable to you. So this is certainly a non-exhaustive list, even though it may have felt like a very exhaustive list. It's a non-exhaustive list of symptoms, but ways to help you think about how burnout can look differently in different people. And again, it also looks different in different cultures, because some people, in certain cultures, for instance, physical symptoms are more acceptable. And so some people might report more of the physical symptoms, and for other people, they might be more sensitive or more emotional people. And so for them, they might notice the emotional symptoms first. But again, to keep in mind that a lot of these symptoms can be attributed to your work environment. So I'd like to take another quick poll first. So now that you have learned a little bit about burnout, you understand the 3 dimensions of burnout, and I've listed them on the bottom as well: exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. I want you to answer the question, have you ever experienced symptoms of burnout? And the answer would be never. None of these things that I just listed sound familiar to you. Option number 2 is yes, you've experienced symptoms associated with one of these dimensions. So again, either exhaustion, physical or emotional exhaustion, cynicism, which is having that negative attitude toward your work, toward your clients, and inefficacy, which is that your work product is negatively being impacted. Option number 3 is yes for 2 of the 3 dimensions. And option number 4 is yes, I've experienced symptoms in all 3 of these dimensions. So please take a moment to take this poll.
I just launched the poll, Ilona. I'm very focused on our presentation, so you're losing me as a moderator here. And I'm glad that some people are already starting to ask questions. So as you feel you have a question, sometimes it's better to just take a note and send it right away instead of trying to remember at the end. Okay, so that's going pretty fast. Okay, I think we can close it now. It's slowing down. And as we see the numbers, 41% all 3 dimensions. It's very interesting. You broke it down basically in a couple of dimensions there. We have 37% with 2 out of 3, 19% 1 out of 3, and then we have that still insisting 3%, never. Okay, we can hide that and you can go on.
Thank you for that. So those 3%, they're consistent, and I like that. And so if you rated any of the other options, 1 dimension, 2 dimension, or 3 dimensions, you are with the majority. So conservative estimates, and these are conservative estimates, they show that at least half of Americans will experience some symptoms of burnout at some point in their professional life. And so this is something that a lot of professionals experience, and a lot of professionals, such as myself, when I was in that situation myself many years ago, they don't have the language to explain what it is. And a lot of organizations don't have the language to explain what it is. And so it's important to continue to engage in these types of conversations. And what you learn today, especially if you're in a leadership role, but even if you're not, to start to have these conversations with your team members, with your employers, with your employees, to help people understand that it's okay to talk about it, that we recognize that it's an issue, and more importantly, that it's a clear issue that has a clear solution. So workplaces that promote mental health are more likely to reduce absenteeism, increase productivity, and overall have a benefit from associated economic gains. So this is why we care on an organizational level. I know organizations, some organizations, certainly not all of them, they're really focused on the company's bottom line. They want to be profitable. They want to make their stakeholders happy. I get it. That's a priority. But again, for companies that focus on mental health, they're more likely to be profitable because their employees are less likely to take sick days. They are more likely to be productive, and they're less likely to make mistakes. That's also important. I didn't talk about this early on, but my research on burnout was focused in the legal profession. I specifically interviewed attorneys. And when I tell people about my research, if they're not lawyers, they often ask, oh, why did you pick lawyers? If they are lawyers, they never ask that question because they know precisely why I pick lawyers. And that's because it's notoriously a very tough environment to work in. And especially if you work in a big law firm, there are just additional challenges. And so I wanted to understand when I did my research, given the difficulty, how notoriously difficult it is to work in a big law firm, there are still some people who thrive and there are still some people who burn out. So what is the difference between those people? What are the differences between those environments, right? And to help understand why is it that some people, even in the most difficult environments, are still able to enjoy their job and still able to lead healthy, balanced, and effective lives. And so when I talk to organizations, again, they often want to know, is this type of work worth their investment financially and time-wise? And I help them understand that, again, when your employees are healthy, especially when you are a firm, any type of company that provides a service, if you have a product, that may be different because independent of who's behind that product, you still have a product to sell. However, if you are a law firm, your product is your attorneys. And if you have healthy attorneys, they're more likely to think creatively, they're less likely to make mistakes, and you have clients who are betting vast amounts of money on your lawyers being correct. And so it's important to invest back into your attorneys. Some estimates show that burnout and other mental health symptoms, especially those related to burnout, they cost the US economy hundreds of billions of dollars to up to $1 trillion a year in lost productivity. And again, this is an important issue, not just because we care about our people, but also because it impacts the company financially. So let's talk about what some of the risk factors are. What are some of the individual risk factors as well as environmental and organizational risk factors that can increase the chances of burnout? On an individual level, and I'm going to talk about these first, but again, please keep in mind, as I mentioned early on in the presentation, that environmental risk factors are the biggest predictor of burnout. And so individually, individuals who are perfectionists, who strive for perfectionism, they are more likely to feel burned out. And that's often because instead of striving for excellence, they strive for perfection. And perfection is quite literally something that is unattainable. And so often with a lot of my clients who struggle with perfectionism, they will do something over and over and over again until it's good enough based on their standard. And so part of my work with them is I help them understand that given that they have such a high standard, even if they did something that was good enough in their mind, it would still probably be above and beyond expectations for most other people. So helping them reframe how they look at their work product. Individuals who have a high need for achievement are also more likely to burn out. So these are individuals who want to have control over the situation. They say yes to everything because they want to make sure they do it because they are going to do it the best and they don't want to rely on anyone else to do it. Of course, this contributes to burnout because suddenly they said yes to everything and everyone, and now they have so many more things on their backlog to get done. Communication is another big risk factor. So individuals who have poor communication skills are more likely to burn out. Part of that is related to what I just talked about saying yes to everybody instead of having the capacity to say no, even if this person is a senior leader, saying you don't have time for this thing, or maybe you don't have time to do it today or this week, but you can put it on the top of your list for next week, and if that would be okay. Just engaging in that type of communication, both with senior leaders and clients, and helping everybody understand what else is on your plate. In my work as a professional, I know early on in my career it was difficult for me to say no, especially to senior team members. But what I've learned is that when I have these conversations, when I open the dialogue, the expectations are clear for everybody. And I've never had anybody say, no, you have to get it done no matter what. So just keeping, again, the lines of communication open. Rigidity is another individual risk factor. Some of my clients who have the ability to delegate work don't, simply because they want to do it their way. And so some of the work that I do with my clients is I ask them just very direct questions of, well, you want to do it in this way, let's say in A, and this other person is willing to do this task for you, but they do it in a type of B, as an example. Is that okay? Is it okay if they do it differently? Because what you gain from it is that it's taken off of your plate and it's taken care of. And so being able to be more flexible. And then finally, setting boundaries, including with your colleagues, with senior team members, and with your clients. So being able to set boundaries with your clients. for a lot of the attorneys that I work with, they don't not like their job across the board. What they find once we really dive into this work is there are specific clients or specific partners, let's say, who are more difficult to work with. And so as we strategize of how they can do more of the type of work that they enjoy and less of the type of work that they don't enjoy, or less work with the people they don't enjoy working with, they find that they enjoy their legal practice, or they enjoy their legal work a lot more because they're eliminating those specific things that are less enjoyable. And so, for instance, if you work with an individual who is so incredibly stressed out and disorganized and everything is always last minute and it's always an emergency, and then you get it to them, but they sit on it for 2 weeks and you had to stay up until, I don't know, 2 a.m. getting it done, that might not be a good working relationship for you. So if you have an opportunity to figure out how you can do less work with that type of a person and more work with the type of person who works more closely to how you work. Environmental factors are, again, as I mentioned, the number one contributing factor to burnout. And so an environment where there is a high demand and a low control is really the perfect formula for creating burnout in your employees. So highly demanding environment is any type of environment where either the clients or the leadership are highly demanding. It's very fast paced, there's a lot of deadlines, and there's a lot of pressure to not make mistakes. I use the example of lawyers, and I work a lot with lawyers in my practice as well. For a lot of them, they work in a very highly demanding work environment. There are deadlines that they have to submit documents by. They have partners who sometimes walk into their offices and yell at them and ask for things. And they have clients who are constantly demanding that lawyers make miracles happen and work outside of the law somehow. And so they have a lot of pressure, a lot of these high demands. And again, clients are betting vast amounts of money on them being right and their legal expertise being right. A low control environment is an environment where an individual doesn't have control over their work. So it might be they don't have control over the type of work that they do, or they don't have control over the type of clients that they work with, and so on. And so typically entry-level employees unfortunately experience this environment, both of these components, where it's highly demanding, but they don't really have much say or much control over the type of work that they do. What I encourage employers to do is to figure out ways that they can give at least some control to their team members. So if they can even say, okay, you can work on this project A or this project B, which project would you like to work on more? Even if they still get to choose between only 2 options, at least they have some semblance of control over the type of work that it is they do. Today, with everything that's going on with the pandemic, and this is something I've been talking to clients about for years, is perhaps giving employees control about when they do their work. For a lot of my clients, again, they don't have an actual physical product. They're not doing manual labor. They work with ideas. They work with services. And so for a lot of my clients, they're really able to do their work at any point in the day. And so people with young families, for instance, it's really helpful for them if they have at least some flexibility and control over their schedule so that they can drop off their kids at school in the morning, pick up their kids in the afternoon, have dinner with their kids, put their kids to bed, and then at night, often they end up working 2, 3, 4 extra hours to catch up with the work throughout the day. So figuring out different ways, different creative ways that you can give control back to your team members. Relationships are a huge buffer. It's a protective factor against burnout. And on the opposite side of that spectrum is poor relationships are a huge contributing factor to people burning out. So it's that old saying that employees don't leave companies, they leave their managers. And there's a lot of truth to that behind in the research. I've had a lot of clients who have been underpaid but have loved working for a specific manager, a specific team leader, and were willing to sacrifice financial gains, for instance, to be able to work with somebody who they enjoyed working with. And then the opposite is also true. If you have a very negative relationship with a senior team member, a senior partner, or even a colleague, that can negatively impact your day-to-day experience at work. And so figuring out ways that you can improve relationships in the workplace is incredibly helpful. And it's very easy to do, and it's very cheap to do also. Even having coffee hours, something like that, where employees can build those relationships. And again, now with everything that has changed, I know a lot of people are working from home. So again, devising creative ways to keep people connected and to build those relationships. Another huge environmental risk factor is when values are misaligned. So if your values are not aligned with the values of your employer, the values of your industry, it's going to be a struggle for you day in and day out. Some of the attorneys that I work with work in criminal law. And so I like to use this example because I think it's a clear one that most people can understand. As an attorney, your job is to do whatever is in the best interest of your client. Sometimes your client made some not great choices in the past. And so some of my clients who are criminal attorneys, they have this conflict where they're helping somebody who, again, perhaps didn't make the best choice in the past, and they have this internal conflict of what is morally right. Because as a lawyer, it's their responsibility to, again, act in the best interest of their client. But let's say as a parent or just as an individual, they don't necessarily feel good about the crime that was committed. And so there's this internal conflict of values. And then finally, a lack of resources. So what I often find is that part of the issue with resources is that sometimes employers do not have the best hiring practices. And so they'll hire somebody based on aspirations and not based on the skills that the individual actually has. And so I've had this conversation and this interaction with a lot of clients on the organizational level, where they will hire somebody who doesn't have all the skills that they need, but then they will fail to provide the additional training and the additional education to get that person up to speed. So if there aren't additional resources to keep your team members engaged in their work and be able to do their work successfully, including resources to help individuals who have too much on their plate, right? Some kind of a system where if somebody has too much on their plate, they can arrest or alert to the rest of the team, and the rest of the team can jump in and help them. But organizations that don't have resources to help team members succeed are more likely to create an environment for stress and for burnout. So with some of these employees that I use an example of, they felt stressed out because employees want to do a good job. They want to succeed. They want to be good at their job. It feels good. It feels good for all of us when we're good at what we do. But if they don't have the right resources to be able to succeed professionally, it feels very stressful for them day in and day out. And so as an employer, it's important to identify what are some additional resources that you can provide for your clients. For some clients that I've worked with in the tech world, and I know often in the tech world, they somehow have a lot more budget than some of the other organizations. But those resources can be even things like childcare. Those resources can be even things like vouchers for having a dinner with your family if you come home late at night and whatnot. So again, thinking of creative ways to support your specific industry, to support your specific employees. So research has demonstrated, and as a part of my research, which I concluded in 2017, I did an intensive literature review, which is that I read every article that I could get my hands on about burnout, and not just specific to attorneys, about burnout in the medical field, about burnout in the mental health field, about burnout in the police force and whatnot. And so based on that research, that literature review, I found that research has demonstrated that environmental and organizational characteristics play the most significant role in contributing to employee burnout. So the good news is that for those of us who are in leadership positions and have the ability to make decisions for our company, you can help support your employees and you can help reduce instances of burnout within your specific firm. And the strategy is really threefold. The first strategy is always prevention. Prevention is key, because burnout is one of those things that changes day to day in tiny little incremental bits. So we've all gotten sick one day, and I've certainly had the experience where I go to bed and I feel fine, and then I wake up the next day and I have a cold. I'm sure many of you have had that same experience. Immediately, as soon as I wake up, I know that I have this cold. I know that something's off, and I'm able to come up with strategies to help me mitigate that cold. Burnout doesn't work that way. You don't feel okay one day and then suddenly you're burned out. So the incremental changes day to day are so small that most people do not notice that they're well on their way to burnout until they start to have some of the more serious symptoms. And so this is why prevention is key. The second option is early detection, right? And so you really want to look at this as like a hierarchy. So if prevention doesn't work, early detection is key, because then your employees or yourself as an individual can get the support that you need. And then finally, rehabilitation is having services available both on and off site to help support your employees. So I have some clients, for instance, who have employee-sponsored mental health care. That is a benefit twofold. One is that it helps people understand that, hey, it's perfectly okay if you're going through something. We have this resource that's available. It's something for you to use, and we hope that you utilize it. And then the other thing is that it helps offset any potential barriers to change. So whether that's a financial barrier or sometimes it's difficulty for somebody who's seeing a therapist for the first time, for instance, to even know where to start. And so being able to support your employees once they recognize or once you recognize that they're experiencing symptoms of burnout. So some best practices for organizations is first and foremost to reduce the risk factors. So some of the things we talked about, for instance, if you have a highly demanding work environment, figuring out ways that you can mitigate some of those demands. For instance, what some of my clients and I will do is we'll go through a list of all of their clients and we'll see which are the clients are they making the most money from and which are the clients that are causing them the most amount of stress. And often they find that there are two completely different sets of clients. They often find that the people who are giving them the biggest headaches are typically spending the least amount of money with their firm, but they're exhausting all of their team members. And then the people who have the biggest contracts or the biggest proposals with them, they are just trusting this company to do their job, and they're mostly leaving them alone, aside from necessary interactions. And so we engage in this process for them to understand that even if you work in a highly demanding environment, you can still be more selective about the type of clients you work with, for instance. You also want to make sure that you increase protective factors. So what we've already discussed are things like increasing resources for employees, figuring out ways to improve relationships within the firm, and even improving your hiring practices, making sure that the individual fits in with your company culture. One of the senior partners that I interviewed, what he said to me is, in order to help create a positive company culture, he said that they try not to intentionally hire jerks. And so if they see that somebody's personality isn't aligned with the rest of their law firm, they're not going to hire somebody who is going to throw off the entire culture of the firm. And so keeping that in mind and improving protective factors. Saying thank you is free to do. It is so incredibly easy, and it's one of the things that a lot of employers forget to do. One of the attorneys that I interviewed, who was 5 to 10 years in the career, what he told me is, he said, even if he works on a case for a year and he wins some big case and it's such an important case and he's worked really hard to do it, he says often he doesn't even get a thank you email, not from the client, not from the partner. And he said that is incredibly stressful because he's dedicated so much time and effort to do the best job that he was capable of doing for his clients. And at the end of it, he doesn't even get a thank you. And again, this is one of those things that is so easy to do. And if you're thinking right now, if you're an employer and you're thinking, does it really matter? It does really matter. That is probably the #1 complaint that I get from clients and from employees that I interview within organizations, is they say, nobody ever says thank you to me. Nobody ever says good job. And people like to get that feedback. You want to make sure that you're promoting mental health and addressing mental health issues independent of the cause. So maybe you have a perfectly healthy work culture and your work environment isn't contributing to burnout, but maybe there are some additional challenges that people are experiencing outside of work, especially with everything that's going on in the world today. So making sure that you're still checking in with your employees, you're sending them information. Let's say you have a company-wide newsletter, you're including that information in there. And then finally, making sure that you're modeling behaviors. A lot of employers will talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk. And employees, they look at their leaders and model those behaviors. So if you are a senior leader in a company and you're telling your employees to make sure that they take an hour for lunch, but you're just sending them emails throughout their lunch hour, they're probably going to feel pressured, at least emotionally, to be responsive to what you're sending. And so even if you choose to work as a company leader, even if you choose to work during that time, utilizing little tools like setting the send time of your email for an hour later until after lunch finishes. And so keeping those types of things in mind. If you're telling your employees not to overwork and they're getting emails from you at 2 or 3 a.m., again, you're setting the standard based on your behavior. So being mindful of how you model the behavior and keeping in mind that the best defense is a good offense. You don't want to wait until your employees burn out. You don't want to wait until you burn out. You want to make sure that you're proactively focusing on your employees, you're proactively focusing on yourself. And again, in the back of your mind, your goal is to take care of yourself and prevent burnout before it happens. If you take care of your employees will take care of you. It really is very
Ilona?
simple. Yes.
So I just want to announce that we have entered into the question and answer portion. So I know we have many questions already here, but if you have a question, please enter it there. I know you're going to have a couple of more slides and one good portion there about individual best practice as well. So maybe if you could skim to that and we start taking some questions as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me know what you have as well. And so a client that I worked with, an employer, when I made a suggestion, he asked me, he said, is this good for the employee or is this good for the firm? And I told him, I said, I'm confused by your question. This is, again, one of those organizations that provided a service and not a product. And what I helped him understand is that whatever is best for your employees is ultimately what's going to be best for your firm, because your employees are going to work harder. They're going to be less likely to make mistakes. And so often a lot of my clients will say, well, this is just the nature of the beast. This is a popular phrase, the nature of the beast of my industry. But the reality is that there is no beast. I know in the US, we like to treat corporations like people, but they're not actual people, right? A corporation is an organization of individuals. An industry is an organization of individuals. And this collection of individuals can make individual choices every day that can change how the whole industry works. So the legal field, for instance, is notoriously very adversarial, but it does not have to be that way. It may have been this way for a while, but it doesn't have to be that way. Law does not have to be practiced that way. And so creating higher standards for yourself and your organization. And then on an individual level, again, to also reduce risk factors and increase protective factors. So having at least one or two colleagues that you can go to and talk to is helpful. I know some of the attorneys that I work with, they say if a partner has been like really tough on them, they can go next door and talk to another lawyer. And it helps them feel better when the other lawyer says like, yeah, this partner is really tough on me too. Then they realize that it's not personal and they're able to refocus back on their work. Improving professional habits. So if you procrastinate, for instance, you really need to get that under control, because that's making everything a lot more stressful for you. If you wait until the last minute and then you have to do everything really quickly and you're stressed out and you're making mistakes and people are calling you and emailing you, asking for things, you're perpetually creating the stressful environment. And then also setting healthy boundaries in and outside of the workplace and having clear expectations. If you're not sure what the task is, ask your employer, get the clarification. Sometimes I'll see clients, pre-pandemic, I used to go see some of my clients in their office. And I've had clients who have had their bosses come in and yell at them in front of me. They didn't get that I was there. And they were so upset that the client made a mistake on something that they didn't get clarification on. And so having, again, clear expectations, not being afraid to ask questions if you're not sure what's expected, because otherwise you're going to have to do something 2 or 3 times. And again, just keeping in mind that you have to be gentle with yourself. This is a process. So if you're identifying, as we're talking about some of these things, if you're identifying some of these symptoms within yourself, there's no need to judge that experience. Just recognize that it's something that you're experiencing and then figure out strategies. And the best strategy is always the first and foremost, reduce stressors. Anything that you can reduce or eliminate is the best first step. And then second, you want to increase buffers. And again, buffers are those protective factors. So when you think about self-care, I want you to think about it as not something that only happens when you get the flu. Self-care is a consistent practice, and it's about finding a balance in your life. Especially for my younger clients, they have this saying, work hard, party harder. And what I help them understand is that if you're partying throughout the weekend and you're getting drunk or using other substances, you're just depleting your physical and emotional energy more. And so to help change the mindset around that, to again, work hard but self-care harder, making sure that you are doing things that help you feel alive, that help you feel re-energized. And these are things that are going to be specific to you. Identifying things that help you feel good. Whether that's going to the beach. I live in sunny, beautiful Los Angeles, and so going to the beach is easy for us to do here, and it's certainly rejuvenating for myself. But identifying things that you do, if it's reading a book, if it's enjoying a cup of tea, they don't have to be super extravagant things. It's just things that can help you focus on your self-care. So I know that we have some questions to get to.
Yes, many.
Adita, are you going to read them to me?
Yeah, I will do that. I was letting you speak because you are also answering some of them. So if you can go to your contact point as well, because I do want them to know where they can find you. You always have these very simple words, but you go very in depth. So I really appreciate that. And I think they can also follow up with you where they could find you. I think you have a slide. Last one should show your contact somewhere. The first one.
Yeah, the first. So let me just get back there quickly. Sorry, everybody. I'm moving through real quick.
So
So
in the meantime,
I just included on, I just included on the bottom my Instagram handle. That's just the most casual way to kind of stay in touch and see what I'm doing. But you can always just Google me and email me through my website if I can support you in any way.
thank you so much. This is a topic that always brings questions, and these questions are anonymous, so it's like a safe environment. One of the questions we had was when you spoke about dimensions. We'll go quickly through those because I would like to get as many as possible. On the dimensions portion, would you recommend addressing anyone first? Any priority there, or would you go, I don't know, by impact and urgency in my view, but how would you address that area?
So the
Between
3 dimensions, so let me just find that slide real quick. So the 3 dimensions are interrelated, and there's not one that's any more or less important. In terms of how you address it, it would be subjective, depending on which one is impacting you the most. So if you find that the exhaustion is kind of leading the way and it's impacting all the other components, and that's certainly the one to target first. But sometimes, again, because these components are interrelated, it is important to come up with strategies for each one. So for instance, if you're feeling exhausted and physically and emotionally depleted, you're probably falling behind on your work, and that's probably contributing more to you feeling burned out. And so the strategy would be to figure out ways to address your physical and emotional needs, but also to figure out ways with your employer, with your team members, how you can delegate some of these other tasks so that you can get caught up, so that this perpetual feeling of always being behind isn't then contributing back to the feeling of burnout. Because this is, like we mentioned, it's kind of like a snowball effect, or it's this tricky cycle, and you have to be able to break the cycle somewhere.
And so when you spoke a little bit about the organizational actions and things like that, what would a manager do to either identify or be preventive to identify the burnout in their employees?
That also depends on the manager and on the organization. I have some clients that have very open relationships with their employees. They have an open door policy. Their employees can come in and talk to them about whatever. And then I have some clients who either clients report to me that they feel like their senior partner or their senior boss is not approachable, or they recognize within themselves that they haven't really created an environment where people feel comfortable talking to them about it. So it might be something that is within the scope of the manager, and again, it's on a case-by-case basis, or it might be something that's within the scope of if the company has, for instance, like a human resources department or some kind of a people-focused department. But I always discourage people addressing it directly. So, saying things like, hey, I've noticed you're feeling stressed out or you're feeling depressed, just because you don't know where that other person is at and whether or not they feel comfortable talking to you about it in a work context. And so the first step is always to have discussions on an organizational level, whether it's within a specific team. So often when I'm brought on board, I might be brought into a specific team. It might be like a little studio within an organization, or it might be, let's say, a legal team within a bigger company. So a specific team recognizes it and they bring me in. But the first step is always talk about it in a group context so that people understand that it's okay to talk about it. There's no shame in anybody experiencing it. They can see that other people experience it as well. And they can understand that the company cares about their well-being and they have resources in place. So often when I work with organizations, for instance, I'm the first person to find out that individuals in the company are struggling, because as a third-party person and I come in, I'm not related to the company in any way. People often feel comfortable telling me what's going on that level. So again, for a manager, I think the best strategy is to figure out ways that you can implement some of these practices on an organizational level or on a team level.
And when it comes to people who are continuously in the stress environment, do you think that people can get addicted to stress, even though they might be aware of it?
Absolutely. Yes. So there's a lot of research on that. For the sake of time, we won't get into those details. But yes, typically if we grew up in a stressful environment, or we were high achievers, we can often thrive in a stressful environment. And so something with like procrastination, for instance, there's some subconscious or inherent need to recreate a stressful environment, because a person believes that they do their best work when they're stressed out, or they are addicted to that physiological activated feeling. And so, yes, there's a lot of research that supports that people are physically addicted to being stressed out, because if you think about what happens to your body when you're stressed out, all these chemicals kick in, right? The cortisol level rises. You could have an adrenaline rush, and physiologically, your body can be trying to recreate that environment, even if emotionally and physically it doesn't feel good to you personally. And so if that's a pattern that you recognize, that you create, chaotic environments or stressful environments in more than one area of your life, then that's something that you can certainly address with a mental health professional to help unlearn some of those learned behaviors.
This model you mentioned as well, what would you recommend the employee does when they realize that a company looks very pretty on a website, and all those mission statements that sometimes I don't think they reflect the reality of what it is. The culture can be understood from people who work there or still working there. An employee who gets that point of awareness, what can the employee do to bring his voice at the organizational level?
Yeah, so I actually have a funny story about this. So when I first started to focus my practice on working with burnout, and I started to advertise and whatnot, I got an email from a very high-level official at a really huge corporation in Los Angeles, and I was excited, and I was like, "Oh my God, I finally made it!" This is a person who I recognized by name just as soon as I saw the email. And then when I read the email said something to the extent of, "There's a lot of burnout and workplace bullying. Can you please send me some information?" It was very brief, which is typical for a person at that level, just sending a quick little brief note. So then I responded to this individual and I said, "I received your information, I received your request. I would love to get on the phone with you and talk and see what type of resources you're looking for." And then this individual responded to me, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So what had happened was that somebody sent me an email with their name and email address through my website portal, which I'm not encouraging any of you on the call to do this currently, but they sent this essentially anonymous email with that individual's name attached, talking about some issues that they had in the organization, and this individual had no idea that it was happening. So that's never a good strategy, because when I explained, I got this email from your email address, the person was very displeased, and we didn't end up working together. So the best thing to do is to, if you're recognizing these things within yourself only, for instance, to address it on an individual level with some of the practices and resources we talked about today. But if you're starting to recognize that your workplace culture is perhaps a toxic culture, or a lot of people are feeling this way, to figure out who within your industry you can talk to about that. Again, if you have a close relationship with a manager or senior team member, that might be the first person that you go to. If you feel like you need to address them more anonymously, again, I know a lot of organizations have HR teams, people that you can talk to there. But sometimes if the organization and the culture is toxic enough, as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, there's very little that you can do. I've worked with organizations that every time somebody leaves, and they try to give them feedback and they say, "Hey, it's really not fun to working here for these 20 reasons." They often reframe it and they say, "This person didn't have what it takes or what it took. This person was not a good employee." And they always have excuses for why the team members failed, and not looking internally within the organization to figure out how they can do better. And so what I often tell my employers is that your top employees, the ones who are best at their work, who produce the best work product, they always have options of other places to go. And so It's important to create a healthy work culture within your company so that you can keep your top employees, because your top employees are going to be the ones who leave first, because I guarantee you that all of them right now probably have at least one email from a headhunter from a competitive company that is trying to hire them. And so making it a priority to, again, take care of your team, and to understand that if you take care of your team, they're going to work better for you. They're going to make less mistakes. They're going to be excited to be there. And when it comes to work culture, and specifically on the emotional level, that is contagious. If you have an employee who's unhappy to be there, they're going to tell all of their colleagues how unhappy they are, and their colleagues are going to also feel unhappy, right? And so it's, again, one of those cycles that you want to be able to intervene as soon as you recognize that it's happening.
So I'm glad we're running out of time, but I'm glad you brought this up, because there is always a level of this is enough, So, and I have one of the questions here, and I see many others are still there, but I would invite them to also reach out to you. I know you're pretty active in your engagement with public as well. The last question I would ask to just close it, trying to understand where is that limit, because one of the questions says, when do I know like resilience is no longer good? Like, because everybody is all about resilience. At the end of the day, it's like, when do I know that I need to to stop this resilience because I'm going over that limit and I'm getting burned out or stressed out?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's specific to the individual. I know, especially in the US, we have this no pain, no gain culture. And sometimes I'll talk about this on my social media as well, because it's important for people to understand that pain doesn't always have to be associated with a positive outcome. Sometimes when you are in a painful situation over and over and over again, you are just re-traumatizing yourself over and over and over again, right? It's like that saying, that popular saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, sometimes what doesn't kill you causes a mental breakdown. Sometimes what doesn't kill you makes you feel burned out. And once you become burned out, it's not something that is just easily resolved by quitting that job, because all of the physical and emotional consequences that come along with being burned out are going to take some time to resolve. And so it's important for each individual to check in with themselves to know what their individual limits are. For me, when I was feeling burned out, and as I mentioned, I was working full time, I was going to school full time until about 10 p.m. every night, or almost every night. I was working on the weekends. The light at the end of the tunnel was that I knew that if I just
Ilona, I can't hear you. I don't know if anybody else is having the same issue.
It was just kind of like how things have been at the company, and at least for the foreseeable future, it's probably going to be that way. Oh, am I back?
Yes, you're back. If you
Can you hear me now?
Because yeah, I was losing you for a moment.
Okay, so assessing individually, checking in with yourself day in and day out to see how you're doing, and again, making sure that you're engaging in self-care on a regular basis. So with everything that's going on right now, I think a lot of us are emotionally, our emotional bandwidth is at its limit. And so keeping that in mind as well. Throughout your life, your work-life balance is going to look differently. Sometimes you're going to be able to commit all of your time to work and just really focus. And other times, let's say you have a new baby, you're going through a divorce, any number of things that can happen in life. There's a global pandemic and so on, right? Our ability to really push through something changes. And so just checking in with yourself and how you're feeling on most days. Some of my clients tell me that every single day feels like a Monday, except for Saturday and Sunday. And so if every single day starts to feel like a Monday, that might be an indicator that you're persevering too much. And perseverance is, I forgot who says this quote, but perseverance is a good trait to have until it's time to give up. You don't want to continue to push through something if there's no end goal or no light at the end of the tunnel. You want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first and foremost.
Thanks, Ilona. And I wanted to point out as well that there is a lot of good information here. So take your time, and everybody can watch it again. Some people asked if it will be posted. As usual, we do post the presentation, as well as on our YouTube channel, we post the recording, and my ASQ community will have the presentation as well. We already have the webinars for July. We'll have a global outreach for July, which we usually do once a year. This year, we're doing more than those. One is in Spanish. The same presentation will be also in August for English speakers. And we'll have one of our team members, actually, Dr. Jesus Gilberto Concepcion, talking about developing a scientific brain and the mathematical brain after the COVID situation. As you see, we're trying to bring topics that do have a lot of impact on the emotional side and are related to the current situation. To get notification for future webinars, our LinkedIn page, for those who don't know us yet, is always updated with the webinars. We do have 1 minute survey. We take a strict look to those responses, so we try to change as you bring feedback, so take a moment to fill that. Also, the credits, as I mentioned at the beginning, for those who attended 40 minutes presentation time, not just like logging in before, we will provide an email, a separate email from the follow-up email. You'll find that within 24 hours. Again, thank you, Ilona, so much, and thank you everybody who took the time to listen in, to go a little bit an inner look and ask some questions that could help them as well. We look forward to having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ilona. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye, everyone.